Okay, so Professor Bunt is a writer and academic specializing in research on Islam and Muslims in cyberspace. He's based at the University of Wales Trinity St David, where he is a professor in Islamic studies and religious studies. Recent publications include #Islam, How Cyber Islamic Environments Are Transforming Religious Authority in 2018, I'm Muslims, Rewiring the House of Islam in 2009, and Islam in the Digital Age, e-Jihad, Online Fatwas, and Cyber Islamic Environments in 2003. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Bunt, whose paper is entitled Social Distance and Digital Proximity, #Islamic Religious Authority and COVID-19. Gary, over to you.
Right, thank you very much, Angus, and good afternoon or good evening or good morning to everybody, and it's great to have you here. So I'm inevitably talking about something predictably digital in my presentation, and I'm going to be exploring ideas associated with the ideas of social distancing. The global pandemic has focused attention on the ways in which Islamic digital interfaces can be utilized within Muslim communities, as we've seen during the presentations earlier today. And this has been highlighted with the intensified utilization of different interfaces aimed to bring together socially distanced communities and networks. So I'm going to be exploring one or two of those interfaces. Some of the themes I've talked about a little bit in terms of social interaction and media in #Islam. And I've also got a chapter coming out in which I look at the pandemic in Rob Rosenau's Cyber Muslims book, which is due out in Bloomsbury Press in the next year or so. And I'm also writing about it for my next book. So we've seen this intensification and expansion of the application of net technologies, and the ways in which key players and organizations have utilized social media to articulate their approaches to COVID-19, as we've already seen today, including different ideas about religious authority prayers, interactive content, and so forth. And it's heightened this recognition that social media can, in some cases, reinforce religiosity, especially in crisis mode, I think. So questions emerge as to how to respond to this particular information overload of authority and opinions within continually shifting media contexts, especially when there's no central authority and we've got a potential information overload of different online influences, the chattering in the online marketplace. And of course, this has been a feature for several years now, and it brings in different methodological and research challenges. So I'll be looking at some of that interaction today. Obviously, it's just a little snapshot on some of these materials. We see different emphases, for example, the way in which the mediatization of Islam in relation to ritualistic practices and expressions of religious authority have been built upon since the commencement of the pandemic. It's amplified them, and we've seen an adaptation of social media in a response really to ideas about lockdown and limited social media, social mixing, where we've seen that access to mosques was restricted or prohibited, as we saw in this morning's presentation. I would say diversity is the key to the interpretation of this online material as well, because there is so much of it out there, and it was quite difficult to bring down a couple of short case studies as part of this presentation. What I'm trying to show is this intensified relationship between individuals and devices, especially with digital natives, and the ways in which apps and other media have brought in investment over time, and they've brought in experience as well. And of course, within this information marketplace, funding considerations are really important. Who's got the money to put in to some of these platforms in order to try and get that sense of religious authority online? We've got competing platforms too. They're competing not just within local or national frameworks, but globally as well, within a fluid social media context. So we've seen a really interesting set of responses from Muslim scholars and authorities within this situation. Elsewhere in this chapter I've talked about Saudi Arabia and Egypt, but I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the materials I've been exploring for my next book. So I decided to take a quick look at the situation with regards to Indonesia, which has already been discussed a little bit today, because the COVID-19 situation in Indonesia has been described as near catastrophe by the Red Cross earlier this week. So as part of this terrible situation, it's been very interesting to see how different authorities and online perspectives have tried to respond to the situation within religious frameworks. We've also seen, as part of this, things like anti-vaccine messages are often being mixed with conspiracy theories about COVID-19. We think about this within the UK context, perhaps, but it's also something that's happening on Indonesian TikTok. And there's a very interesting report coming out of Singapore that has explored this, noting this increase in anti-vaccine propaganda, which is feeding into the mix about online perspectives. So the Majelis Ulama Indonesia has responded online to the COVID situation by producing several different opinions. This is the senior scholarly body within the Indonesian context, and they have provided different fatwa on religious practices. For example, the participation in Hajj, the prayers for the victims of the pandemic, and the provision of guidelines for medical staff wearing personal protection equipment while praying. This is the infographic that they used as part of the projection of this fatwa about people who pray. How do you pray? Wearing PPE. This is something that I've seen elsewhere in Iranian and Iraqi contexts, where there have been some specific guidances appearing online in relation to whether it's possible to pray, because obviously there are ritual practices and considerations and barriers to prayer if one is wearing PPE. So lots of different exceptions apply when health personnel are dealing with COVID-19 patients anyway, but the prayer situation has been one where we've seen several different responses in terms of religious opinions. And this is a sort of semi-official opinion that's come out in terms of trying to help people respond to this situation. But there's been all sorts of other types of opinions that have appeared as well, and other materials that have been deemed as important. The MUI social media highlighted a 2021 webinar offering herbal alternative treatments for COVID-19, whose practitioners claimed they would neutralize COVID-19, although they emphasized that they'd also require clinical trials as well. So it's quite interesting to see this different distribution of religious opinions and ideas appearing on this particular MUI website, where they are suggesting that herbal alternative treatments might be a viable option for treating the pandemic. And this is in contrast to some of the other materials that they have provided, where they are talking about things like the religious opinion on permissibility of swabbing for COVID-19 during Ramadan, and a separate opinion on whether the AstraZeneca vaccine was allowed following allegations that it contained pork-derived ingredients. The opinion actually was that it could be given the specific circumstances of COVID-19, but it still remained haram. So this is really interesting. Actually, that particular vaccine was distributed primarily to zones in Indonesia where the majority population was not Muslim. The other side of this too is it's been very interesting to see the way in which digital media have been applied in relation to presenting this information, and looking at ideas of how infographics have been used. For For example, here we have a fatwa for the organisation of worship during the COVID-19 outbreak here. So we've got some quite high visuals being applied, as well as the very kind of, well, relatively speaking, dry opinions that are also reproduced on these pages, often in the form of a PDF, a religious opinion, very lengthy and covering all of the ground you would expect within a fatwa. So we have got that contrast in terms of the ways in which this information is being presented. And it's not just on the web, of course, but it's the use of other social media, the use of Twitter, the use of Instagram and Facebook to present these opinions as well. And there are many more of these opinions. Quick snapshot of some of the other opinions within the Indonesian context. Maruf Amin, who's the vice president of Indonesia, he was the person who wanted MUI and other platforms to develop their religious responses in terms of the forms of fatwas associated with the COVID-19 situation. And he's an interesting figure. His Instagram page is particularly active, and one page showed him in a particularly animated form here, using his cell phone and producing his opinions about different aspects of the COVID-19 situation. And this is interesting. Normally a quieter member, I think, of the administration, but here he's being at least proactive a little bit online. Now, the Muhammadiyah are one of the significant religious platforms within Indonesia, very interesting and long history associated with ideas about religion and expressions of Indonesian identity as well. And their online response, they're very proactive online. I've been following them for many years. And they initiated, as part of their response to COVID-19, they initiated an online command center channel, which focused on COVID-19, updating on infection numbers from their hospital and providing detailed medical advice. They also saluted medical workers and suggested that in one video with infographics that breaking the chain of transmission, and I'm talking here about infection, was a religious duty. And this has also been presented in videos that have appeared on their own channel as well. I don't think we've got really time to play that particular one, but this is Haider Nasser, who's the president of the Muhammadiyah, and he's focused on traditional sources such as the Quran and Sunnah as means of combating COVID-19. But he's also emphasized that a perceived lack of knowledge and distrust has influenced the spread of the pandemic within the Indonesian context as well. So they've been very proactive. They've developed this online call center as well, and they've tried to project ideas about religious opinions, but also they've combined those with ideas of contesting and dealing with different issues associated with the pandemic. There was also this idea that COVID-19 represented a conspiracy. This is also being countered by the Muhammadiyah chair, Dadang Ahmed, via the online resource. And he says, I think Muhammadiyah people don't use their mind if they say the COVID-19 is conspiracy. It's real. Many people have fallen sick, suffered from the virus and passed away. People should be aware that we have to be cautious about the coronavirus and believe Allah also creates a tiny creature such as this virus. So this is something, again, that's being presented on their official channels in Indonesian and English. There are numerous other opinions within the Indonesian context. Rizik Shahab from the Front Pembela Islam was in the headlines the other day. He's achieved prominence online in terms of the Front Pembela Islam, Islamic Defenders Front. In terms of the pandemic, there's been a lot of rhetoric online associated with him and his pronouncements about the pandemic. And he actually received a 4-year sentence a week or so ago for making a YouTube video stating that he was healthy, although he had COVID-19. Here's a screenshot of the trial, which was put out onto Zoom. This was on top of an earlier 8-month sentence for breaching coronavirus regulations. And he's a figure who's been in exile in Saudi. He fled in 2017 on various charges and returned only in 2020. And that's just another shot from the associated trial, which led to demonstrations within Jakarta after this as well, which were met by the riot police. So the key points in terms of the Indonesian context, this way digital media is embedded organisationally across diverse platforms, the way in which authorities protected online, and the high levels of social media in use in Indonesia are reflected in the ways it's been applied during the pandemic situation. And very briefly, inevitably, I've always got more slides than time, but I thought I'd just talk a little bit about Shiism and religious authority in relation to the pandemic, because I've been exploring this as well very recently. And it's been intriguing to see the responses of various religious authorities. This is by no means a comprehensive list. It's simply a few snapshots from Grand Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. He made a number of statements saying that medical experts had to be followed at all times, criticizing people who didn't wear masks. And he also talks about his concern for members of the medical profession. And a lot of this opinion is presented through the different social media channels and is projected through different media outlets in different ways. And that's a trend that you'll find with some of the other senior figures, Grand Ayatollah Al-Mudarrisi here. I felt this was quite interesting. The Twitter feed was exploring questions sent to his office, along with responses to world issues. And this included emphasis on the questions that were being sent to him regarding different aspects of the COVID-19 situation. We haven't got time to go into these specific questions now, but they're talking about different types of prayers associated with driving away the pandemic, the use of, by some people, the hoarding by some people of medical products to safeguard themselves against the pandemic. So this sort of religious opinion was being pushed out through his different channels as well, through his organization. A number of the Ayatollahs are really proactive in terms of the social media. And from the Iraqi side, Sistani has also produced a number of different opinions, or his organization have typical questions about whether ritual washing for a corpse was still essential, the changes made in burial practices according to Islamic requirements, and different forms of ritual adaptation that have taken place during C19. Actually, we run a course here on talking to the dead at UWTSD, where we've gone through some of these opinions in a little bit more detail. So the Shia perspective is a really interesting one, often underrepresented in academic discourse, but it's been interesting to see how they have responded. Here we have some scholars and others on one of their Instagram feeds going out and dealing with the COVID-19 situation in the environment. So for online authorities within Shiism, social media have been applied to provide everyday updates on different aspects of responding to COVID-19. We've got this generation of web-friendly authorities which now utilize social media in different languages in order to do this. So my concluding points in relation to looking at this, we see an integration of online media to project authority that goes across contexts and religious platforms that's extended itself since the pandemic. It was something beforehand, but it's extended now. It's a natural adjunct for expression, even in contexts where there might be other limitations on internet access. There is a projection to international audiences, as well as very nuanced content for local audiences as well. And this is reflected in the design of pages and the way in which different social media are used. And this is reflected in many other contexts, benefiting from the digital divide, but you can't make assumptions that all levels of society are accessing this content or observing it. So we can't assume everybody is looking at it on their mobile devices. But it's indicative of shifting media contexts and applications within cyber Islamic environments. So that's a very brief summary. As I say, I have written a lot more on this, and you can expect some more on that in due course. And if you'd like more information on my work or to keep updated, then you can check out my website, virtuallyislamic.com, which has got plenty of information about that. And thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. There was an awful lot there to get through. I'm sure it'll keep you busy for the next year or so, something like that.
I think so.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Gary.